ready to start part 6 of building Dancing Feather, Boston pilot schooner. And part 6 is going to start off with planking the bulwarks, and probably going to get into building a cap rail on top of the bulwarks. At this point, we've secured the bowsprit to the hull, and I've also secured the plastic bulwarks at the stern. So we now have a shape of the stern. And I'm starting to look at putting some planks onto the bulwarks. This is interesting because I've tapered the tip of this to fit into the rabbet on the bowsprit. So if we get the angle on that right and we sneak it in there, it should make a nice juncture of the planks to the bowsprit. I've added a couple of pieces here to the bowsprit on either side. They're called the B's, and the B's are where the braces for the mast are going to come down through. We looked at the taper of the plank where it fits into the rabbet on the bowsprit, and I've gone in here and I've tapered the end of this plank where it's going to join up against the 3 layers of styrene. On the other side, it's going to be a flush joint, more or less, and won't need much of a taper to put the two together, but here I had to taper it to get a fit over. And then we'll sand that all flush after it all goes together. So the next thing I'm going to do is go through here and mark the ribs on the inside of this plank to determine where I'm going to cut scuppers, where the deck would drain off through the scuppers. So get a pencil out, we'll mark those, and then we'll notch the plank for where the scuppers are going to go. I've begun to notch scuppers into the bottom bulwark plank, and I've marked on the bottom of the plank the location of the various ribs, and I'm using this file . To create scuppers. Okay, now I'm just going to use a fine sandpaper and take the little chips off the edges, and we'll see how that looks. Well, we've cut the scuppers in, and that looks like it's going to work out rather well. So I'm going to actually paint this plank inside and out before I put it on, because it's going to be easier to get sharp lines between it and the covering board and whatnot. So I'm actually going to take the time to get a finish on it first. Getting ready to fit the plank on the starboard side. And first thing I want to do is put an angle on the plank that's going to match the rabbet on the bowsprit. So I'm just going to use trial and error until I get a good fit. We'll start off with an angle about like that, and we'll give it a trial fit, see how it looks, and make adjustments if we need to. So it turns out that that angle is actually pretty good. So now what I need to do is to put a taper here where it comes into the bowsprit so that we get a good mating surface. And again, we'll do that by trial and error. So that gives us a pretty good fit of the first plank coming into the rabbet. We'll start from there. No matter how careful I was in cutting the frames out and drawing them and whatnot, there's always some place where you get some discrepancies and errors, and I've got one here and three here where the gap to the frame is too wide, and I'm going to actually shim the frames to bring them out to the plank at that point to maintain the fairness, and then we'll cut away some of the frames on the inside if they need it to make it look correct. I had an instructor once who told me we're not in the business of making things perfect. We're in the business of making things look perfect. That's my goal here, is find something like that, we'll fix it and make it look perfect. This is what I'm doing to shim those ribs out. I made the shim longer than it has to be. I can trim that off at the top later. But we'll do that to those four ribs, and then we'll fair them in with the planking. Use the planking like a batten. We'll get those all faired in. It should look pretty decent. With this last one, the piece I'm adding on, I actually had to sand a bit of a curvature in it to get it to conform to the frame. But now we got some meat on those, and gives us something to work with, and we'll carve them back until they're fair with the planks. Well, it looks like the places that I added onto the frames has worked out rather well. I just filed them in a little bit till now they're flush to the planks. So I got one here which I may want to add a little bit too. Got a bit of a gap in there. If you look straight down on it, you can see it. Where'd you go? Here. So anyhow, the high frames will get cut off later. I've painted the inside of the stern bulwarks, and I've cut some stanchions for the stern bulwarks. I'm now gluing them in place. I like to use this something sold by Micromark, and I use it, put a little bit of glue in here, and then dip into it, and use the little piece of bamboo here to apply the glue where I want it. It gives a nice accurate way of getting glue in, and it keeps it from getting too much glue, which wants to run down here and there. So anyhow, that's the way I like to glue small pieces in. And then it has a little rest where you can put the stick when you set it down. Now that comes with a whole bag, if you want to buy them, of inserts, so that when that red insert gets all dirty and caked with glue, you just replace it with another cap plug. I've glued on the first of the bulwark planks, and I painted it black before I put it on, because where the plank meets the rabbet on the bowsprit, I'll never get as sharp a line. Also, as it comes in on the covering board, I'll never get as crisp a line on that as I've painted after assembly. So that's why I've painted it black. And you can see the scuppers cut in. And I've glued a bunch of stanchions into the stern bulwarks. Those will get painted the same color as the deck, the covering boards, everything the same off-white. I'll have to trim the tops off before we put the cap rail on. But starting to look a little bit like a boat. Just finished gluing the first bulwark plank in on the starboard side, and I've trimmed all the stern bulwark stanchions down, and we painted them to match the stern bulwarks. So it's starting to look pretty good at this point. Have the bulwark planks on now, and what we have to do now is fair them in. Once we get them faired in, then we can start the cap rail. I've finished planking the bulwarks, and they're looking reasonably decent. I've painted the first coat on the outer stern bulwark, which was made out of styrene, and it blends pretty well in with the planking on the side bulwarks. Oops, still got a little bit of trimming to do. Some of these frames come above the planks, which they shouldn't. We'll trim those down. And the next step is I'm going to have to start to figure out how I'm going to form the cap rails on top of the bulwarks. And I'm thinking I'm going to be doing that with some of these fine pieces. And I'm going to glue that right down on top of the bulwark and form it around the top of the stern bulwarks. And then I'll keep gluing them next to each other until we get the full width of the cap rail. Because if I try to bend this out of a wider piece, I'm not going to be successful. So we'll build that up out of several strips of narrow pieces. I'm just beginning to start to glue the first piece of the cap rail in place. And it starts just above the the bowsprit. And I've glued it in place to begin with, and then I'm going to have to form it around as I put the glue on it and set it in on top of the planking, the bulwark planking. And then I'll build outwards from that one strip and inwards probably two more strips on the inside to form the full width of the cap rail. And then when we go around the stern, I'll be looking to put the bent pieces of strips around the stern, like this piece. We'll go around the stern and we'll build it up that way. I just finished gluing the first strip of cap rail onto the stern bulwarks and carried that forward into where we've been gluing in the cap rail. We've got the width of two boards at this point, coming back to about here, and then we're going to put the second one on the inside of this piece, and we'll build the cap rail up in sections like that. I glued the second bent curved section of the cap rail over the stern, and we've installed that. So starting to build up some thickness of the cap rail, and I've already rounded over the outside of this bent piece because it's going on the outside and it wants to be rounded over. Both the outside and inside pieces of the cap rail will be rounded. And this one has a coat of cream paint on it because if I can paint it now, it'll give me a nice sharp line against the black as it goes around, and I won't have to worry about brushing that next to the black. So I'll paint the entire outer rail cream before I install it. I just glued the outer edge of the stern cap rail into place, and it's nicely rounded over, and it's going to be a nice separation between the black and the rail underneath because it's already painted, so I don't have to worry about painting that seam. And I've got a piece over here that's being bent, and that's going to go on the inside to finish that off. So then the cap rail will be at its full width at that point. I've tapered the frames back so that they'll be under the inner edge of the cap rail. So that'll look decent. I have the side pieces that go from here all the way up to the bow. I have those over here. They've been painted and they're just drying. So those will be the next piece to glue on. I've finished putting together the cap rails all the way around, and I've used a little bit of filler in places just to fill in gaps and whatnot. But I want the rail to be perfectly smooth. I don't want any of the construction by fine strips of wood to show through under the paint. So I'm going to mix up a little cup full of a sanding sealer that I like to use. It consists of nitrate dope, which is a model airplane like a lacquer, and I've mixed with that a little bit of baby powder, and that will make a sanding sealer that I can go over this, and all the lines between the slices of wood will disappear, hopefully. This is the material that I'm going to be mixing with baby powder, and I get some in a cup and mix it up. We'll get a picture of that. This is the nitrate dope. I'm just about to add some baby powder to it, and we'll mix that up and make a sanding filler. Well, now we've added the the baby powder to the mix. Gotta say, I really get carried away with this thing. Way too much I mixed. I've applied a fairly heavy coat of the filler primer to the rails, and that should fill in any of the small seams and cracks that might be visible under the paint. So that dries very quickly. Probably can touch it. Yeah, I can touch it here already. Being a solvent-based lacquer type material. So probably about 10-15 minutes I'll be able to sand that all out, and we'll be able to start painting it with the buttermilk cream. I just sanded the cap rail sanding sealer with a 400 grit, and we're looking pretty good at this point. I think we're ready to give it a coat of the buttermilk cream. I think any of the strips of wood, the seams between them, should disappear at this point. So next we'll paint it. Got the first coat of buttermilk white on the cap rails, and it's looking pretty good. The shear line is now pretty much defined. So the next point of part of the build is to start putting some planks on the hull below the cover board. And being at that point, this is probably a good point to end the part 6.